Hi everyone, welcome to Unit Standard 24480. We are carrying on with Facilitate the Development of Babies. This is the third and final part of this topic. Let us have a look at early brain development. Adequate stimulation is essential in ECD, as the first years are when the brain grows the most. The child's brain is sensitive to changes in the environment, and more stimulation equals more growth. High levels of childhood stress and adversity equals high stress related disease in childhood. Now, when we look at what we mean by adequate stimulation, we are looking at the kind of stimulation that the child needs, not any stimulation, not sitting in front of a TV all day, not doing things that are not allowing the child to grow. The child will become bored. They learn incredibly quickly. Even though they repeat many activities or actions, they are still learning at a rapid rate. And so you need to ensure that they are stimulated in such a way that facilitates growth, that facilitates language ability and physical growth as well, and progression and emotional progression, healthy attachment, and so on. So, we are working with the child's actual cognitive and psychological development as well as their physical development. Remember, the brain links to everything, it is our central processing unit, it is where our information stems from. And the environment that the child is in is going to play a major part in that. And so, as we learned previously, when we compare nature versus nurture, the environment plays a slightly larger role in the way a child grows. And so, you can teach a child based on its surroundings. Now, think about this, for example, if you plant a seed in infertile soil, you are not giving it what it needs. That seed is not going to grow. If you plant a seed in soil that is rich in nutrients, where the environment is good, where it will get the sunshine it needs and the rain it needs, it will grow into um, the most optimal plant possible. So, the more you stimulate the child adequately, the more the child will grow. You want to feed that child knowledge and understanding as much as possible. So, if the child is under severe stress and adversity, if you are constantly allowing the child to stress, in that the child doesn't know if you're reliable or not, if you are an unreliable caregiver, it is a big problem because the child grows up thinking that the world is an unreliable place. If you are not meeting the child's needs, in that the child doesn't know when he or she will eat if he or she is hungry, the child doesn't know when he will, or if he will have clothes to wear today, the child doesn't know if he will be kept safe from the elements, the child doesn't know if he will be protected from bullies. It leaves a lot of uncertainty, and when the child grows up and becomes an adult, these things continue to play on his or her mind, and they become stressed as adults. And so, as they believe that, there are many gaps that need to be filled still in terms of fulfilling one's needs. And this is a very big problem because those adults then become parents and raise the same kind of children, and it's a very reckless cycle. So let us have a look at risk factors. So 20 to 25% of infants in developing countries are affected by malnutrition that is chronic. If something is chronic, it is continuous over a large period of time and severe enough to cause growth stunting. We learned earlier that children who are not fed well in their early years can have a higher risk of diseases like schizophrenia. And that's a very big deal. And that's a very large consequence. So, inadequate stimulation or learning opportunities. Iodine deficiency. Iodine is found in certain vegetables. It is a mineral present in certain vegetables, in seafoods, and it is essential for normal thyroid functioning. And so, if we don't have our necessary minerals, we start to develop illnesses, physical illnesses. Iron deficiency. Um, uh, which we categorize as anemia, which makes one tired and weak, and you have chest pain and you have cold hands and cold feet. And this is a problem in concentration, in learning. So let us look at how we can intervene. Children need to spend time in caring, responsive environments. So do adults, don't we? And so, if we do, how much more do children need it? And so, they need to understand that the world around them is caring, that someone will be there to assist them, that a mom or dad is a reliable source, and that the space they are in is one that will protect them. And so, this is not to say you're teaching a child that the world is idealistic, not at all, but you are not supposed to just teach your child. I've heard this many times. I will show you that the world is harsh out there. As a parent, that's not what you need to do. You need to show the child that they have a safety base to return to, because the world is harsh out there, but that they have a safe space to go to when they encounter that harsh reality. Early childhood development interventions provide direct learning experiences to children and families, and they are targeted to young and disadvantaged children, high quality and long lasting, integrated with family support. When something is integrated, it means that various parts of it are linked. And so, various parts of the child's care network, such as family support, health, nutrition, the education system, and services, are all intertwined, and they form one large team or unit in order to provide adequate care for the child. Now, your healthcare providers are trusted sources of information for families and can give critical guidance about how to communicate with infants and children, ways to stimulate children for better growth, how to handle such common developmental problems such as sleep, feeding, and discipline, ways to reduce common childhood injuries. So the keywords here really are common. The word common is really a key word, because these are things that are typical in the growth of children, such as they don't always have the best sleeping patterns. We know that new parents are constantly tired, and even at toddler years, children are struggling. Some children struggle to find a sleeping routine. Feeding, in that they don't want to eat, or they want to eat only the same thing for the longest time, and you can't get proper nutrition into them. And discipline, they are still learning to control themselves and their impulses, and they're learning about the laws of society and how they are supposed to carry those laws out, as well as consequences for not carrying those laws out. And so healthcare providers really can assist in how we address these issues with children, and ways to reduce common injuries such as head bumping. Head bumping is very stressful and is also very common, and that is because children's heads are little out of proportion, I suppose, to their little bodies. And so they don't, and also their center of gravity is not yet centralized. So they tend to fall a lot and they bump their heads a lot, and so on and so on. When we look at communicating with infants and children, it is also important that we understand the ways that we communicate with one another as adults is very different. Now, I learned something extremely interesting. It's a theory about boredom in adult relationships. And it speaks about the darker meaning behind it, is that when we get bored of a partner, sometimes it is due to a certain pain that we hold. Perhaps they've done something to us and we haven't yet let it go. And so we hold on to it. And when we react to them coldly. So we become a little detached or withdrawn. And the reason is because when we love someone, we do it with a very, with a childlike part of ourselves. It's a very vulnerable part of ourselves. And so that part needs constant protection. And so we tend to become closed off and cold and maybe aggressive in means and ways to protect ourselves. And so if we don't work our way through whatever it is that hurt us, or we don't speak to our partner about it, or they persist with the same behaviors, we tend to close off and we say we're bored and the relationship has gone stale, and so on. And so it's interesting to know that even with adults, in terms of communication, it is that you are communicating in close relationships, intimate relationships, you are communicating with someone from the perspective or towards their more childlike and vulnerable nature. And so it is important, even as adults, that we address each other with care, that we speak to one another with sensitivity, with empathy, and so on. And so it's not just when we speak to children, it's when we speak to each of us. You want to know that whatever uh, a vulnerable part of yourself is being exposed can be protected, that you do not need to be hurt. And we start that communication with children, and we continue that as we move forward into our adulthood. It's very interesting to know. And so we need to consider the economic impact of early childhood development. And so investing in young children is an essential component for the development of a national economy, because those children will grow up into adults. Those adults need to be functioning members of society. So the earlier the child has good opportunities in learning, in combating nutrition, malnutrition, in in being adequately stimulated and being adequately physically stimulated as well, it leads to more productive adults. It leads to children. If you allow a child to attend school, there is a higher chance that they won't turn to crime as an adult, that they'll have better health, and that there will be lower levels of welfare dependence than those who do not receive this early developmental support. And so, what we do for children will definitely affect the world we live in. So, if you want to start changing the world you live in, start with a child. Start with a child, and that is after you've worked on yourself, by the way. But you start at grassroots, you educate, and this is what we are trying to accomplish by providing this course, especially at the price that we are providing it at, is with the aim of starting at grassroots to allow the economy to grow. Then the WHO response, the WHO response, that is the World Health Organization, and the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, established by WHO in 2005, identified early child development as a priority issue. So the WHO, alongside UNICEF, have developed a package of tools for primary healthcare workers and community-based providers to assist parents, families, and communities on how to promote child development and to prevent risks. It is a synthesis of the most effective approaches, the synthesis meaning it is a coming together of the most effective approaches that have worked in the context of resource poor countries. And so, what this is trying to accomplish is that it is trying to pick out the issues that we have in early childhood development in all societies, but it is trying to ensure that the solutions are matched with those where the socioeconomic status is a lot lower, where the income is a lot lower. And so, with resource poor countries where they don't always have the resources to ensure that bridges are gapped. My apologies, that gaps are bridged. That is to ensure that everyone is able to have access to that solution. Within these solutions, we also consider methods such as responsive teaching strategies, which we will actually cover in the slide to come. But with responsive teaching strategies, behaviors are learned, such as the development of cognitive communication and social emotional abilities. And this is what we call pivotal behaviors. So remember, to pivot is to turn. Pivotal behaviors are vitally important behaviors. I like to think of them as behaviors which can turn your life around. And so when we look at these, we look at them as a means of assisting children to engage in more mature, reciprocal social interactions. And in addition to acquiring these new skills and behaviors, at least five other activities are involved in developmental learning. And these include becoming proficient with a newly learned behavior. So, when someone is proficient, they are competent. And when you are competent, it means you have the necessary skills. So they'll have the necessary skills to be able to carry out that newly learned behavior. Understanding the uses of newly learned behavior, I think this is one of the more difficult ones, and this is what we need to try to implement at the start of learning the behavior so that children have motivation to learn the behavior. I think for anyone, changing a behavior is extremely difficult. It's a great mental effort, and I think it comes with a lot of maturity and wisdom to say, I am going to change what I am doing because what I'm doing is not beneficial to me. And so to try to relay that to a child is a lot more difficult, I believe, than relaying it to an adult. But the great thing about it is with children, they are still extremely impressionable. They are still extremely malleable. And so there are certain habits that they still need to form. And so as long as we can address this in the very early developmental phases, it makes it a lot easier as they grow so that they're already in a certain behavior. So don't steer away from telling a child. Um, Tell the child, I see it very frequently. Oh, you don't want to change your nappy? If you don't change your nappy, you're going to get a rash or your bum is going to burn. Talk to them, tell them, because they might understand so much more than you give them credit for, especially a child who is able to speak, where they do understand. And I've seen children understand this very simply. If you do that, you are going to get hurt. Therefore, do not do that. So, explain the consequence of it to them, and so that they are able to understand why they have to commit to a certain action. It is so that they can avoid an adverse consequence. Understanding the limitations of newly learned behaviors. With everything, there is a limit. So, also teach them that, and you need to understand that there will be a limitation to those behaviors as well. Discovering other behaviors or concepts that are more effective than the newly learned behavior. There are many ways to skin a cat, they say. It's a very odd saying, it always gets me, but there are many ways to skin a cat. Just because a theorist has said that one behavior will work doesn't mean that another will not. So if you see that you are trying to mold a child into a certain behavior, but it is not beneficial for them, it is not working, it's not something they're taking on, you can look at other ways, you can look at different strategies, and you might find that other things are more effective than others. And so go ahead and do a little digging, do a bit of discovery, watch the child observe, and do some research so that you can find what works better for some than for others. Giving up the old behavior to make room for the new behavior. Now, here's a task and a half, isn't it? Think about an addiction. Think about smoking. Some people smoke and they want to give it up. They say, this is not the way I want to live my life. I want to have a healthy body. I'm going to give up smoking. And sometimes you'll find they give up smoking, they take up eating. And so you're giving up an old behavior, but you're picking up a new one. So you need to make sure that that old habit that you're giving up altogether, that you are not introducing a different habit in place of it, but instead you are bringing up something. The new behavior is something healthy that you're implementing in your life. So the same with the child is that, let us say, their old behavior was that they used to push children. It's not now that they're not pushing, but now they're kicking. So they're giving up the behavior of aggression, of fighting, um, altogether. Perhaps instead of pushing, they could learn to hold their hands to themselves. So, clasping their fists, for example, and that can be one way of distracting them from pushing. Put your hands on your side, okay? Prevent yourself from pushing, and eventually they'll let go of the habit altogether. Or you can say to them, anytime you feel like pushing a child, take a breath, take a deep breath. Every time you feel like pushing a child, go sit on your own somewhere. And so you are conditioning them to get out of an aggressive behavior in place of a calmer behavior. Now, let us have a look at responsive teaching. In your book, you will find that it is on page 336. and we are having a look. So we are going back a little bit because we've already discussed pivotal behaviors, but I wanted to look at responsive teaching on its own. And so this is responding to the student moment to moment. And so in your classroom, you'll find, oh, I'm teaching the group this, but one child is not grasping this. So I need to respond to that child's behavior. You'll see in class, there are so many unpredictable things that happen. I walked in once on a little boy who was new to the school, and he was running around with a pair of scissors. And I thought, no, man, that's all kinds of dangerous. And I took it away from him. And I first watched him for 2 minutes to see exactly what his plans were. And he went outside and started cutting the grass with these scissors, and he would just start cutting up everything in his path. And I took it away from him and I gave it to his teacher, and I told her to keep it far away from the kid until he's more responsible. And I had found that just the previous day he tried to cut a girl's hair with those scissors. So unpredictable things happen in the classroom all the time, and you respond to that unpredictable moment per child as it happens. And so with responsive teaching, it's exactly as the name states. You are responding. You are responding to classroom behaviors. Now, with cognition, and this we find on page 338. With cognition, we have a look at social play. Remember, with cognition, we are looking at your mental growth, your mental knowledge, your mental perception and awareness. And so, with social play, that is definitely going to extend to your cognitive growth because you are gaining knowledge as to what the laws are in how to handle and manage yourself in a social setting. When we look at initiation, knowing when to start something up, knowing when to begin an action, exploration, that is discovery, problem solving, goes without saying, running into obstacles and understanding how to maneuver your way around those obstacles to cause the best possible outcome, and practice, which children usually find in repetition. And so with practice we repeat, we push ourselves forward, we learn to better our abilities. And with communication, we look at joint activity. Those are interrelational or intergroup relations, as well as intra-group relations. So INTER, inter, that is communication and behaviors between yourself and someone else. Interaction is action between yourself and someone else. And so that is what inter means. It's between you and another. And intra, INTRA, that is within. So you can have activities, joint activity that is within the group. And you can look at your group dynamics on the inside, and then you can have a look at how the group is performing with other groups. And so when you communicate with each other, both inter and intra communication are extremely important. Vocalization, how we speak. Are we screaming at one another? Is everyone aggressive in the classroom? Is it calm? Is it too quiet? Is everyone whispering? Could you imagine if I just whispered this lecture the entire time? You would be so frustrated. Say, speak up, I can't hear you. And so your vocalization is also going to lend itself to how the crowd or the audience is hearing you and how you are being perceived, and if your information is getting through to the audience. Conversation, back and forth communication between yourself and others or group members. And this is whether or not a message is being received by the listener and whether or not you are conveying the message adequately. Now, social emotional functioning. This is your trust, your empathy, cooperation, self regulation, feelings of control, feelings of confidence, and so on. And all of these things are also pivotal in becoming functional human beings. If you're able to trust, it makes life a little easier when you're trusting at the right times with the right people. So you also need discernment. And so we teach children to trust, and we have a look at what their responses are in environments where they ought to trust, but perhaps they don't, or they are too trusting in other environments. And so empathy is also putting yourself in their shoes, understanding, okay, I see that this one is not working in class today because he or she witnessed the parents fight and it really affected him or her. And so with empathy, you need to understand that, especially with little children who are still learning to regulate themselves and control their feelings. And this is going to be something that could affect them very drastically in the classroom. And so the way you address it needs to be in such a way that it is constructive enough that they understand the problem as clearly as possible without dragging them into the problem, and then you putting yourself in their feet. How would you feel in that situation, as opposed to yelling at them? I remember once in class I was very distraught, extremely distraught, and I wasn't usually so. I'd usually really just kept my composure, and I just couldn't focus that day. Something really uh, upsetting had happened. And my teacher just said, well, what we're doing in class is really important, so you need to concentrate. And it didn't help because it just made me resistant towards the teacher. I thought, well, you know what, he's a very selfish man. He's very cold. And what I am currently dealing with in this moment is a lot more important to me than whatever he is preaching to me in the classroom. And so it is better to get the child to a state of emotional stability and then to carry on with your work so the child can focus and also see you as a safe space. Then verbal and non-verbal interactions. With your verbal, you are using the spoken word, and that could also include how you project yourself at the vocabulary you use. And so, with your verbal communication, if you are screaming at someone, if you are swearing at someone, you cannot expect that they are just going to bend to your will. Now, especially with people who go ahead and they think that the world should bend around them because they are swearing, because they are screaming, and they use it as a mechanism of fear. And sometimes it works, but if you're strong enough, it doesn't. It causes a rebellion. And so, when you are speaking to children and other adults, in the verbal form, you speak to them with respect. The best possible outcome is that everyone find a working solution for the entire situation, so that there is no lasting and unnecessary conflict, that you don't need to go ahead and use words that degrade the other person. And we want to learn when we speak and when we listen, and we can't do that if we are losing our heads and our composure. Now, with nonverbal communication, that is your body language and gestures, but silence also speaks volumes. So let us have a look at nonverbal communication. Kinesics. That is the study of how we use body movement and facial expressions. So we interpret a great deal of meaning through body movement, through the look on our faces. So sometimes, and think back to your mother's house or to your grandmother's house, whoever was your primary caregiver, there is a look that they could give you that would tell you what you are doing now, you better stop. And so they do not always need to speak. They just look at you and they give you a face, and you know what, it's my time to keep quiet now. And sometimes someone looks at you and they smile. And that is to say, hey, I approve. We've made me happy. Or seeing you has made me happy. So the look on our face is going to give an indication of our thoughts and how we feel and what we think. Facial expressions such as eye contact also gives you an understanding if someone is staring at you. It makes you feel some way. So you either feel uncomfortable or you think, oh, so and so is looking at me, that's a good sign. Or, oh gosh, so and so is looking at me, that's not a good sign. But no one is saying anything. So eye contact, that also says a lot. Haptics, that is the study of touch. And an example or examples of that are hugs, kisses, handshakes, playful roughhousing, which means it's a little rough play between you and someone, but affectionately. And that demonstrates meaning. So if we look at different cultures, especially, touch is welcomed in some cultures, but it is welcomed under circumstances in other cultures. And so, and in most cases, you can only touch someone should you follow a set of spoken or unspoken rules. You can't just go to strangers in the mall and put your arm around them. It is all kinds of uncomfortable. And so, bringing someone into our personal space is a deeply personal thing. And so, with hugs, kisses, handshakes, whatever it might be, a kiss on the cheek, not everyone wants to be kissed, not everyone wants to be hugged. And so, it is, oh my goodness, goes without saying even that we need to consider someone else's personal boundaries. We need to be able to understand that not everyone is affectionate like I am. We need to know not everyone wants to be held or have a kiss on the head or being kissed on the cheek. It doesn't work the same way for everyone. You need permission to be touched and to touch. So, your personal experience as well, your objects and artifacts are also non-verbal ways of communicating. You can give someone something, you can hand them an object, for example, and you can relay a meaning with that object. And so, if you give someone a gift, that is not speaking, but that gift says something to the next person. In some cultures, men and women are not even allowed to touch unless they are married. I like those cultures. That's good. And so, for some cultures, touch is also is a more sacred thing than in others. Now we look at proxemics. That is the study of how we use our space. So when we say, or how we use space, or how the use of space, my apologies, influences the ways we relate with others. It demonstrates our relational standing with those around us. So Edward Hall developed four categories of space we use in the US. We are not in the US, we are in South Africa, but this is categories of space that are used in the US to form and maintain relationships. So, intimate space consists of space that ranges from touch to 18 inches. Now, once again, we are not in the US, we do not use inches, we use centimeters, we use the metric system. And the metric system, that is about 45 centimeters. So, from touch to 45 centimeters, the theorist would consider that being intimate space. And we use intimate space with those whom we are close, family members, close friends, intimate partners. Then you have your personal space, which ranges from 45 centimeters to 4 feet. Once again, we do not use feet, we use centimeters, we use meters. And so 4 feet would be 121 or so centimeters, 1.2 meters. And that personal space is usually reserved for most conversations with non intimate others like friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and so on. And then social spaces extends from 4 feet, once again, that's about 1.2 meters, to 12 feet, which is about 3.6 meters. So this man was very particular in spacing. He was very particular in how far you are supposed to stand or how we usually stand in proximity to others whom we are speaking with or dealing with. And so that is used in small group interactions, such as sitting around a dinner table with others, or a group meeting, or public spaces, and so on. So public spaces actually extend beyond 12 feet, 3.6 meters or so. And it is most often used in public speaking situations. So we use space to regulate our nonverbal communications and communicate relational and social meanings. So, a fun exercise to do is to go to public space and observe people based on their use of the above category of space. Now, you're going to have to sit there with a notebook and look at how far apart everyone is according to this man's very particular measure. And you are going to you're going to write down and say, okay, I see those people are really close. So you don't write it down, you observe. You say, okay, they're holding hands. That's personal. That is intimate space, that. And then you're going to go, oh, I see that those people are about 5 meters apart. Okay, that's public space. They really don't want to sit together. And now some people think that public space and personal space is the same thing. And when you are in public, they sit nearly on top of you, even though you've never met them before. Oh my goodness. So people are different in the way they perceive it. It could be cultural, it could be habitual, it could be a lack of boundaries. But the way that we perceive it makes us feel either comfortable or uncomfortable when we are in proximity with others. Our environment acts as another type of nonverbal communication. So think of your home, your room, your car, or your office space, and what meanings can others perceive about you from these spaces? What are you trying to send by the way you keep them? So the car that you drive, is it eccentric? Is it a wild color? Is it something that is very plain? Is it something you didn't really choose, you were just given? Is it something that you don't have? Your room, your home, the kind of clothes you wear, or the way that you spread out your clothing, the home you have, the way you decorate it says something about you. When people walk into your home, they've got a bit of an understanding of your taste, of what you like, of what you dislike in your space. Is it cluttered? Is it clean? And this communicates to others a little bit about you. Chronom- Chronomics, my apologies. I was slightly out of breath there for a second. And that is the study of how we use time. So chron is the prefix that we use for time. So like chronological is how we relate events to time, where something's in chronological order, it's in the order of when it's of the time it occurred in. So chronomics, the study of how we use time. So consider how your time affects the next person. It drives me insane when someone doesn't consider that if you are half an hour late, you are taking half an hour of someone else's day. That is half an hour that they are sitting there waiting for you. And you're not considerate enough to think that that half an hour could have been used in a different way other than waiting for you. And so it's important when we use our time, if you're going to be late, which happens sometimes, at least tell someone. But if you are late for the sake of, "Ugh, I didn't want to get up and then I was faffing, then this happened, I didn't prepare well enough," this is a problem. It's a problem, it's inconsiderate. And so the way we use time also is telling of us. It tells us how we consider the space and the world and the people around us as well. It says if we are meticulous and organized and we're able to organize our time well. Then we've got para language. And in Greek, that prefix para stands for near to. So it's nearly language. It's nearly language. It's a term we use to describe vocal qualities such as pitch, volume, inflection, rates of speech, rhythm. Examples are sarcasm and incongruency. So if something's incongruent, it is in a state that is not in harmony with that around it. So, for example, if you're sitting in a library and you are screaming at the person next to you, you're incongruent. Your language is incongruent. It is not in harmony with the silence around it. Or if you're telling a joke and let's use our examples in the book, for example, is the comedian Stephen Wright. He bases much of his comedy on the use of paralanguage. So he speaks in a completely monotone, that is one tone, mono meaning one, a monotone voice throughout his act, and frequently makes his statements such as, "I'm getting really excited." But his voice is monotonous. It doesn't change. He doesn't say, "Ah, my word, I'm getting really excited." And his face doesn't change. It looks the same. His voice remains the same when he says, "I'm getting really excited." It's like people who smile and say, "Oh, I'm so angry." You think, "Oh, what's coming?" It's a bit scary actually to look at someone who's smiling and says, "I'm so angry." But if it's someone who's smiling, who has a really genuinely happy face and says, "Oh, I'm so mad," it's very difficult to take that seriously. So silence, and that is also a means to communicate, but it's also to assist flow of conversations, such you don't always need to ramble. And then sometimes when you are quiet, It also allows the listener to take in what you have said, but silence can also indicate a refusal to speak to someone. So if you're saying, I'm quiet, means you are not speaking to the next person, you are refusing to communicate with them. And that is a cause of and that is also a way of communicating to someone as well, how you're feeling. If you don't want to communicate with them, it shows irritation or sadness or frustration or anger. Then we have a look at functions of nonverbal communication. So we use nonverbal communication to duplicate verbal communication. For example, nodding your head when you're saying yes. So the yes already means yes, and then the nodding of the head on its own without speaking also means yes. So you are duplicating, you are doubling that communication. To replace verbal communication, perhaps you're in a space where you can't speak, so you put your finger over your lip, don't say anything, and that is to tell someone to keep quiet. We use nonverbal cues to complement verbal communication. When something complements, it goes well with, it adds value to. So if a friend tells you she recently received a promotion and a pay raise, you can show your enthusiasm in a number of verbal and nonverbal ways. If you exclaim, wow, that's great, I'm so happy for you, while at the same time smiling and hugging your friend, you are using the smile and the hug to complement the words you have said. Unlike duplicating or replacing nonverbal communication, that compliments cannot be used alone without the verbal message. So, for example, your friend tells you that she got a promotion at work and you just smile and hug. It is not that you are saying, wow, I'm so happy for you, that is so great. Okay, there is a difference. A hug could mean very many things. You could hug someone and say, oh, I'm so sorry about your promotion. I know that you actually didn't want to be promoted for some reason. You wanted to stay where you were. So a hug could mean that. It's not enough to just hug in terms of complementing verbal communication. You speak it and then you also go ahead and add the compliment. We use nonverbal communication to accent verbal communication. So that is to give emphasis. For example, to when you're angry with someone, you say, I am very angry at you. I am very angry at you. You are emphasizing that very to demonstrate just how angry you are at someone. And so you make sure that you emphasize that. So to regulate verbal communication, we use verbal communication, so to regulate. And I just wanted to go back for 1 second to clarify the accent. Even though you are speaking, it is the tone of your voice that is indicating just how angry you are. And that is paralanguage, it's your tone. And then we use nonverbal communication to contradict verbal communication. So, for example, if you're saying yes, but you're nodding your head, that is a contradiction. What you're saying with your mouth verbally, and but you're shaking your head. So, you could be giving an indication to someone that what I'm doing with my head is indicating the truth of what I'm actually thinking, but I'm going to verbalize this for the sake of perhaps you're in a social situation and you need to say yes, but you're trying to tell someone, no, don't do it. So, that is a contradiction. It is also to mislead others. So humans, we're very complicated, and so sometimes we use nonverbal communication to deceive to deceive others. And so, for example, when someone asks you for an opinion of a new haircut, if you did not like it, you may have stated verbally that you like the haircut and provided nonverbal communication to further mislead the person about how you really felt. So, conversely, when we try to determine if someone is misleading us, we generally focus on the nonverbal communication of others. So, some call it a tell, perhaps, is that if someone is lying, they might have a tell where they are rubbing their wrist when they lie. or perhaps they look a certain direction when they lie. And so that is also a misleading form of communication. But you've got a smile on your face. So you're saying, yes, I love the haircut, but you're forcing the smile. And so you are forcing your nonverbal reaction to make sure that the person believes that you actually like the new haircut, even though you do not. It's also to indicate relational standing. For example, where you are in your relationship with someone, perhaps holding hands, that indicates that you're in an intimate relationship with someone, that you're very close, or the fact that you're hugging someone, or that you're leaning on them, or that you stand very far from them, indicates perhaps that you're not close together. Perhaps it also indicates your eyes could also indicate your relation to another person. The way you look at them. Do you have angry eyes? Are you looking at them lovingly? We use nonverbal communication to demonstrate and maintain cultural norms, as I spoke about earlier, that people in different cultures obviously have different beliefs in terms of touch, in terms of how close in proximity you might be in your nonverbal cues as well. And so we have already shown that in some normal nonverbal communities, communication is, or my apologies, we have already shown that some nonverbal communication is universal, but a majority of nonverbal communication is culturally specific. For example, some societies place a high value on a personal space. You can't just come into someone's personal space. You can't just, I remember having a picnic and someone was sitting very close, or they were actually they were sitting quite far from us initially, a group of people of perhaps 10 or so, made up of children and adults. And we were just sitting having our little picnic, myself, my husband, and my daughter. And some of the children came up to us and just started touching my daughter's face and her trike, and they started sitting on the blanket and going through our bags. And we just had we had such an adverse reaction to what was going on, and I was wondering what my daughter would do about it. And she, being as young as she is, said to them, no, leave it, please leave it. And so she started to have this panicky reaction as well, even though she is not yet two. And so it shows exactly that even in a young child, exactly how you feel about your personal space and your personal boundaries. And she had felt like hers was definitely being imposed on, and so did we. And so that was a very uncomfortable experience, and we just tried to diffuse it politely. And eventually we just packed up and we left. And so personal space is of importance to people. You don't just jump over someone else's boundary. You don't just go ahead and enter someone's space without their permission to do so. So, in some cultures, it might be the norm where you're allowed to do so, where you can go and sit on someone else's picnic blanket, even if you don't know them. You can go through their stuff or whatever it might be. But for other cultures, it's just a big no. And so we need to understand that we are different culturally, and we need to respect that. Now, 5 criteria for positive discipline. We are now looking at positive discipline. Facilitation is carried out. Sorry, my apologies about that. Facilitation is carried out such that behavior and life skills are modeled in a developmentally appropriate manner. You get positive discipline and you get negative discipline. So, with negative discipline, for example, you can't go ahead and hit a child with a rod and say this is discipline. You are harming the child. You can't hit a child with an electric cord and say this is discipline. This is hurtful. And so, recent research tells us that children are hardwired from birth to connect with others. That means as soon as you come out and you enter this wonderful world that we're living, you have got an immediate draw to want to connect with other people. Children feel a sense of connection to the community, family, and school. Children who feel a sense of community to a sense of connection to their community, family, and school, are less likely to misbehave. They have a sense of belonging. And so they're not seeking negative attention in order to gain a bit of affections from the outside world or from their communities. To be successful contributing members of their community, children must learn necessary social and life skills. Positive discipline is based on the understanding that discipline must be taught and discipline teaches. So, Jane Nelson gives the following criteria for effective discipline that teaches. So, the five criteria for the positive discipline is: one, it helps children feel a sense of connection. I like to, when it is time to discipline a child, I really believe that it is also important, especially in the older years, that you look at the cause of the misbehavior, that you don't just discipline the symptom, but that you look at the cause and you address that cause. It's the root of what is causing it. And sometimes you don't always have a hand in the external forces causing them to misbehave. Perhaps there's something going on at home and your hand can't extend that far. You can't always involve yourself in the child's home life, but there are ways and means that you can help them address it themselves or personally. And so when we discipline children, it is not to make them feel shunned, but they also need to understand that only people who behave a certain way are welcomed into society. Now, it sounds harsh, but think about prison. In or people go to prison because they could not behave in society. So they literally have to go and sit in cells, in jail cells, because they cannot function with other adults in their communities. And so, lessons such as time out show children that okay, you are not behaving right now, which means you cannot be part of our normal proceedings. However, you can discipline a child in such a way that they still feel like you're doing it out of love or care or affection, or it is a way that your love is not cut off from them because they're being disciplined. Now, the second one is mutually respectful and encouraging. It is kind and it is firm at the same time, which leans into what we just mentioned as well, is that you still consider that the child has value, the child has worth, and you encourage their good behavior instead of just breaking the child down about their bad behavior. So they can be punished, however, they can still feel loved. Say, look, I'm still your teacher. I'm still going to care for you. I'm still going to want to teach you, and I still think you're special. But your behavior right now is very wrong. And this is your punishment, therefore. Number three is effective long term. So it considers what the child is thinking, feeling, learning, and deciding about himself and his world and what to do in the future to survive and thrive. Once again, you can't just discipline, but you haven't told the child what the consequence of his or her actions are, or why what he or she has done is wrong. So they need to understand that what I'm doing now is not welcome here, nor is it welcome in any kind of future. It is wrong behavior, so that when they grow up, they are respectable adults. Teachers important, number four is teachers important social and life skills. So they also need to learn to respect each other. They need to have concern for others. They need to be able to problem solve and cooperate, as well as have skills to contribute to the home, the school, or the larger community. So I recently had a learner who broke a light in my class, and his mother asked me what the cost of the light is so she can replace it. Now, I thought a bit about it and I thought, you know what? In this, his mother is taking responsibility for that light. He should perform a certain duty at the center so that he can learn that what he did was wrong and there are consequences. So perhaps he ought to work in the tuck shop or sweep up the leaves. And in this way, he is responsible and not someone else. And so you are teaching that child to thrive in a larger community by understanding that their consequences fall on them. Number five, it invites children to discover how capable they are. So it also encourages them. You can speak to them and say, but you know what? This is not what I see in you. What I see in you is a very good young man who will one day grow up to be really successful if you have the discipline to be that way. And so you teach a child this behavior, this does not need to be a part of you. You are capable of more than this. And you can change this. I can see it in you that you can change this. And so you assist the child to work to that great potential. You assist them to use that potential and harness it into action. Now we look at the tools and concepts of positive discipline, and these include the mutual respect. Adults model firmness by respecting themselves and the needs of the situation, and kindness by respecting the needs of children. Identifying the belief behind the behavior, as we mentioned, is what is causing this child to misbehave. And then how do we address that as well? Effective discipline recognizes the reasons kids do what they do and works to change those beliefs rather than merely attempting to change behavior. Once again, you are addressing the root, you are not just addressing the symptom. Effective communication and problem solving skills, discipline that teaches, focusing on solutions instead of punishment. That's important. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to help you grow instead of just make you feel bad about what you've done? Encourage instead of praise. Encouragement notices effort and improvement, not just success, and it builds long term self esteem and empowerment. Unique characteristics of the positive discipline module also include teaching adults and students through experiential activities. So, speaking about things that have really happened, applying the knowledge in real life situations, creating opportunity to practice those new skills and to have fun learning to do so. So, learning your theory, then practicing your theory in real life situations. Classroom discipline programs and parent education programs that are consistent, not one way one day and a different way the next day. That confuses children very, very much, and they don't know how to behave on different days. Parents, teachers, and childcare providers can work together to provide a secure, consistent environment for children. Inexpensive training and ongoing support so members of communities can teach each other positive discipline skills. You don't know everything, and you might be an expert in something. And so you can always share knowledge and you can receive knowledge. So, as a community, you work together to harness those skills and to share knowledge about how you can positively discipline. Certified trainers across the country who can work with schools and communities. So you speak about those, or you speak to those who can provide assistance. You can speak to those in different career fields who can guide you and lead you, like your healthcare providers, your social workers, and so on. Now, let's have a look at holistic education, which we have covered multiple times, and we are just going to touch on it briefly. And it is a philosophy of education based on the premise that each person finds identity, meaning, and purpose in life through connections to the community, to the natural world, and to humanitarian values such as compassion and peace. So it's building a full and whole individual, not just an academic individual, but one who understands his or her place in the physical world as well and has values to share with individuals around him. Now, a philosophical framework for holistic education states that holistic education aims at helping students be the most they can be. Abraham Maslow referred to this as self actualization, and we have addressed Maslow's hierarchy of needs and in a little pyramid. And if you haven't yet addressed it, we will address it in the next semester. And so self actualization is climbing up the hierarchy of needs. Is when one need is fulfilled, you're able to move on to the next. And when all of those needs are fulfilled, you find yourself at a point of self actualization where you find your meaning and your purpose, and you become your most valuable self. My apologies. We then have ultimacy. And in ultimacy, we break it up into religious, psychological, and undefined. So with religious, that is becoming enlightened spiritually. Spirituality is an important component of holistic education as it emphasizes that all connectedness of all living things and stresses the harmony between the inner life and the outer life. So something transcendent is what we look at when we look at religion. We see there is meaning beyond just the flesh and beyond just the physical world. There's intrinsic meaning as well, and we are all connected. We live together. We care for the environment. We care for one another. We try to share life and love with people, and in the world that we live in, we have respect for it.